The fateful day begins. If you asked anyone in Willow Creek, Texas, they'd probably tell you I had a picture-perfect life. A 2-story house at the end of Maple Drive, a garden bursting with sunflowers, and a husband who never missed a Sunday dinner. My name is Jenna Rosenthal, and for most of my 38 years, I genuinely believed in the sort of American dream you see in commercials. Family cookouts, birthday cakes with too much frosting, late summer nights counting fireflies on the porch. Everything looked just right, at least from the outside. But looking back, I realize how little I understood about what really held my world together. Each familiar comfort, a smile from my husband Tyler, a phone call from my younger sister Marissa, even the way sunlight filtered across our kitchen floor, felt like proof that my life was steady and good. It never crossed my mind that behind those ordinary days, cracks were forming, growing wider beneath the surface. That morning started like any other. I woke before sunrise, padding barefoot into the kitchen to feed our orange tabby cat, Copper. The house was silent, filled with the scent of fresh coffee and newly cut grass drifting in through the screen door. Tyler stayed upstairs late, fiddling with paperwork in his home office, while Marissa, who was staying with us after a tough breakup, mumbled good morning and disappeared for her daily jog. I remember standing by the window with my hands wrapped around a mug, feeling a swell of gratitude, maybe even pride, at how far I'd come from the scrappy kid growing up on the wrong side of Dallas. Nothing fancy, but we'd built a quiet, happy rhythm, and I clung to that normalcy harder than I realized at the time. Still, there was a subtle tension I didn't have words for. Tyler had been distant, distracted by phone calls he took in the garage. Marissa seemed anxious. Her laugh ringed with nervousness, asking questions about bank accounts and property lines. I shrugged off as idle curiosity. There were late-night whispers, unexplained outings, and a growing collection of secrets swirling just beyond my grasp. On that fateful morning, as I slipped a pie into the oven, pecan, Tyler's favorite, the phone rang. It was my mother, her voice weighted with worry. "Jenna, honey, is everything all right over there?" I laughed it off, saying we were fine, that it was just a busy season. I couldn't have been more wrong. Before noon, a legal notice arrived. Thin, ordinary envelope, but inside, it told me my world was about to shatter. I read it once, then again, unable to process what it meant. My name struck from accounts, documents I never signed, and our family business transferred away overnight. My hands shook. The oven timer buzzed, but that pie would never make it to the table. That was the moment everything changed. My entire sense of security, the glue that bound together my marriage, my family, my very identity, crumbled in an instant. The day began with sunshine and coffee, but by evening, it was unrecognizable. I didn't know it then, but I was about to step into a storm that would force me to question everything I thought I knew about love, loyalty, and myself. The unthinkable betrayal. Looking back, I can almost pinpoint the exact instant the world I trusted began to tilt. It wasn't when I saw the lawyer's envelope, or when Daniel snapped at Olivia during breakfast about the coffee being too strong. No, the real tremor was subtler. The kind that only makes sense in hindsight. The sort of ache that blooms quietly, and then, suddenly, is everywhere. It started later that afternoon. I'd finally gotten around to opening the envelope, while Olivia and Daniel were in the living room, half watching a rerun on TV. Inside was legal jargon I had to read twice before the words made sense. A notice regarding changes in our property deed, new beneficiary information, and something about asset transfer approval. My heart pounded. I remember setting the papers down, swallowing hard, and trying to steady my thoughts. Had Daniel talked about refinancing? Had we missed a bill? Or was this some bureaucratic mix-up? I walked into the living room with the envelope clutched in my hand. Daniel barely looked up from his phone. Olivia paused her nail painting, but kept her eyes lowered, pretending to focus on her cuticles. I questioned them. Voice gentle at first, then urgent. But Daniel brushed me off, mumbling about business stuff and too complicated to explain. Olivia, so quick to champion me on every little thing, suddenly seemed fragile and jumpy. The silence between us heavy. It snowballed fast from there. That night, after a dinner I barely tasted, I found Daniel's laptop open on the kitchen table. His emails were brighter and easier to navigate than he expected. I saw messages, contracts, details of investments I never knew about. Olivia's name appeared far too often, in ways that made my skin crawl. They'd set up overseas accounts, shifted assets that rightfully belonged to both Daniel and me, and even started the process of selling our house. My name was missing from more forms and messages than I could count. I confronted them then. In the ugly blue light of the monitor, Olivia sobbed. Daniel raged. They blamed stress, the economy, each other. Any reason but themselves. The betrayal wasn't just financial. They had rewritten our family. I was cast aside, handed the role of outsider in a life I'd carefully built. I felt raw, exposed, as if every foundation of love and trust had been yanked from beneath me. There are moments that change a person for good. That was mine. The hour I realized I had lost not just money and a home, but also the last shreds of trust in those I loved most. If I close my eyes, I still see Daniel's cold stare, Olivia's mascara running down her cheeks, the flickering TV stuck on a laugh track that no longer seemed real. The world, it turned out, could crumble quietly and quickly. Sometimes, even before you have a chance to fight back. Rock bottom. Losing everything you thought you knew isn't like a storm blowing through. Quick, violent, then done. No, falling to rock bottom is a slow, aching undoing. The steady realization that every safety net is gone. Every comforting routine poisoned by loss. In those first days after my husband Mark and my sister Lila's betrayal, I wandered through the remains of my old life like a ghost, numb and powerless, unsure if I was even real anymore. The morning after the confrontation, the house felt colder, darker, as if the light itself was too ashamed to stay. Mark avoided me, speaking in clipped half-sentences, packing up odds and ends from his study, while Lila's footsteps creaked overhead. Her bedroom door stayed closed. Ashamed or afraid, I couldn't tell. I was left with questions, echoing in every empty room. How long had this been building? Had all the smiles and reassurances been lies? Where had my judgment gone? Trying to cling to something normal, I cooked pancakes for breakfast, Mark's old favorite. When he didn't come down, I stared at the empty dining table, syrup pooling on uneaten plates. Even Finn, our loyal retriever, seemed to sense the shift, resting his muzzle on my knee and watching me with mournful brown eyes. Outside, my neighbors passed on their morning walks, waving as always. Their smiles felt distant, like memories I couldn't reach or trust. It didn't take long for the shock to turn into something more practical and more terrifying. The bank called, gently but firmly, telling me my name was no longer attached to any accounts. Credit cards declined at the grocery store. Insurance bills and mortgage letters arrived with my details missing or crossed out. The house, my safe haven, was now a battlefield of Post-it notes and legal notices pasted on kitchen cabinets. With every passing hour, it became clearer. I had nothing left. Not a penny saved, not a title to my own home, not even the comfort of my childhood bed. Lila had sold it, I discovered later, to help settle her debts. My mother tried to call, but I couldn't bear the shame of answering. I drifted from room to room, packing boxes with shaking hands, hugging a few faded photographs I had time to save. The legal process hit like an avalanche. Summonses, restraining orders, a barrage of accusations from Mark's side, lies designed to isolate me from the shallow comfort of friends, who now hesitated to pick sides. Maplewood felt smaller by the day. Word spread like wildfire. Nora Bennett, abandoned, swindled, too proud for help. Some whispered about my private troubles, while others crossed the street, eyes averted as I passed. No one wanted my grief to rub off on them. I remember the night I finally had to leave. Mark, face empty and remote, watched from the back porch as I shouldered my suitcase and Finn's leash. Lila never appeared. I walked past the mailbox one last time, my hands raw from clutching keys I no longer owned. The moving company had carted away most of my life. The wind picked up what little was left. A note from my mother, a crumpled receipt for a wedding dress, a torn page from a childhood storybook. The ache in my chest wasn't just sadness. It was humiliation, fear, and the sharp tang of anger. I rented a room by the highway with what little cash I had from selling jewelry and keepsakes. The space was cramped, dusty, and overlooked an endless stream of trucks, their headlights cutting the night into pieces. I slept poorly, haunted by memories, Lila's giggle from behind my bedroom door. As children, Mark's hand warm in mine during the 4th of July parade, the sunflower wallpaper I picked out for the kitchen. All those anchors gone. Poverty taught me new lessons every day. I took whatever work I could find. Waiting tables at a greasy spoon off Route 8. Cleaning offices after hours. Tutoring kids in nearby neighborhoods. My law degree, so hard won, felt a century away, irrelevant in this new existence, where survival meant learning not to cry over spilled coffee or a bruised knee. Every act of starting over was laced with humiliation. Landlords suspicious of my credit report, bank clerks speaking slowly as if I'd never balanced a checkbook, whispers behind me in the grocery line. I learned to shop late at night so I didn't have to see old neighbors, to wear sunglasses indoors to hide the purple smudges of sleeplessness under my eyes. Still, I kept going, sometimes grudgingly, sometimes out of pure spite for Mark and Lila and all the people who had watched and done nothing. But the biggest bruises were the invisible ones. Trust, once so freely given, now felt like a razor blade, hidden in every handshake. I recoiled from small talk, suspecting every kindness to be a prelude to gossip or betrayal. The only comfort I had was Finn, his patient eyes tracking me through grief and rage, his unconditional love, the last remnant of my old life. As winter pressed in, I hit my true rock bottom. 2 jobs, barely enough to cover rent and canned soup. The heating bill came due, and I sat wrapped in coats, handwriting resumes under the yellow light of a thrift store lamp. Occasionally, I'd see Lila's name in the paper, attached to a charity event, or some real estate deal. Mark changed his status online to single, surrounded by friends whose loyalty shifted with the wind. All I could do was press on, teeth clenched, refusing to let the shame consume me. Some nights, though, I would allow myself to remember. I'd look at Finn, curled in his bed, and whisper, "We're still here, you and me." It was a small comfort, but the first step out of the pit is always believing there's a way up. And deep down, buried under the rubble of my old life, was a kernel of something fierce, a stubborn refusal to let this be the end. I didn't know how or when, but I would reclaim what I'd lost, and I would make sure Mark and Lila felt the full weight of what they'd done. But for now, survival was enough. The journey back up, the days that followed, were defined by hunger, physical, emotional, spiritual. There was the obvious, of course. My stomach gnawed at me as I rationed meager meals, making a can of soup last through 2 dinners. But far worse was the ache for purpose, identity, a place in the world that was mine and mine, alone. If rock bottom had been an erasure, a wiping clean of all I believed myself to be, then clawing my way back promised a painful rebirth. That first freezing March morning, when a thin sunlight finally broke through the crack of my motel window, I stared at the ceiling and told myself, "Emily, you are not finished yet." It was the first time I'd used my own name, alone, as something less than an apology, and more of a promise. Even Finn seemed to sense the shift, tail thumping once as I pulled on mismatched socks and set out for another day at the diner. There's nothing glamorous about starting from scratch. The waitress gig burned my feet and my pride, but it offered structure and, occasionally, kindness. A regular named Old Man Simmons, who left me a $5 tip and a napkin scrawled, "Keep your chin up, darling." Other nights, I cleaned offices, scrubbing toilets and polishing fixtures that gleamed in ways my life didn't. The lawyer in me, educated, once respected, handed cases that shaped people's futures, found herself mopping floors for strangers who didn't know her name. As weeks drifted past, I forced myself to remember what I'd once been capable of. Long hours at a law library, reading civil codes until dawn, negotiating complex contracts with the cool head of a seasoned mediator. If the world thought I was finished, they were wrong. I began to spend my scarce free moments at the public library, hunched over ancient computers, reading up on property law, divorce statutes, and, most urgently, how to untangle financial fraud. I took notes, organized folders, rebuilt a sense of control, one page at a time. Finn waited patiently under my desk, a silent partner in my late-night battles against despair. Financial disaster forced creativity. I posted flyers tutoring kids after school. Reading, math, science, anything a desperate parent would pay for. The money was small, but the sense of competence, immense. Every spelling word, mastered by a 3rd grader, became a pinprick of hope, a reminder that value wasn't always tied to a paycheck or a title. I cobbled together a bare-bones existence, celebrating every week I could keep a cheap roof over my head and a can of dog food for Finn. The humiliation and isolation didn't melt away overnight. Sometimes old neighbors saw me in the store and offered pity or pointed avoidance. The worst encounters were with acquaintances who wanted the inside scoop on my scandal. I learned to smile, keep answers vague, and save my fire for the battle that mattered, getting my life back and getting justice. Collecting every scrap of paperwork Mark and Lila had left behind, I pieced together my own forensic audit. Bit by bit, I mapped their web of fake loan agreements, real estate transfers, and asset sales. I traced signatures, copied contracts, and built timelines scrawled across the recycled backs of diner menus. The sheer gall of their scheme infuriated me, but it also fueled my resolve. I would take back my name, my dignity, and my place in the world if it was the last thing I did. There were setbacks, days when I felt too tired to fight, when rejection letters from law firms or scoffing landlords made me want to disappear. At my lowest, I confided in Finn. "We won't always be broke, I promise you." It was embarrassing, and maybe a little mad, But sometimes a promise made to a loyal dog is easier to keep than one made to yourself. A break came when one of my tutoring families, a kind woman named Laura, offered me the chance to take on some freelance legal research. She had a friend, she said, facing an impossible battle over custody, and couldn't afford big city lawyers. I poured myself into the case, working by street lamp glow and sharing files over ancient email accounts. The gratitude and small fee she managed to muster restored a flicker of faith in my own abilities. More referrals followed. Word spread. Nora Bennett knows the law, and she's relentless. Every dollar was stretched, but I set aside a tiny fund. My battle chest. I opened a new bank account, learned to check for fraud, and registered for a community course on coding, reasoning that a new skill couldn't hurt. I stopped apologizing for my story. If anyone asked, I told them straight. I lost everything, but I'm fighting to get it back. Old memories stung less with each milestone. The first letter from a client addressed to my new P.O. box. The first pay stub that listed only my name. The afternoon Finn and I celebrated a year since leaving Maplewood, with a shared burger and a lazy nap in the park. I kept my head down, eyes open, refusing to look back, except to fuel the bonfire of regret into a determined, righteous flame. There was something almost beautiful about those stubborn, solitary months. My world grew small. Friends who stuck by me, clients who trusted me, Finn's constant loyalty. I rebuilt faith in humanity, one person at a time, and relearned how to trust myself. Even failure felt easier when it was on my own terms. With each passing season, I grew stronger, a little harder, a little wiser, but always hopeful. No one could erase what was done. But as spring returned and the world started blooming again, so did I, fiercer, more independent, and no longer defined by someone else's betrayal. The climb wasn't over, but for the first time in years, I wanted to see what lay at the top. We're not there yet, I whispered to Finn. But we're not broken either, not even close. The plan for justice, plotting my path toward justice, wasn't a dramatic flash of anger or some cinematic moment of inspiration. Instead, it crept in slow as sunrise, reaching me on nights when sleep refused to come, and every ache in my body reminded me of what had been stolen. Alone in my tiny room, with Finn splayed across my ankles and the hum of trucks outside, I realized there was only one way forward. If I ever wanted peace, if I ever wanted to look in the mirror again and recognize the person staring back, I would need to fight for myself, for what was rightfully mine, for the life I'd built, and the dignity I'd nearly lost. At first, the idea was overwhelming. Where would I even begin? Alex and Sophia hadn't just betrayed my heart. They'd spun a web of deception that left me isolated, broke, and doubting my own sanity. But the anger that crackled inside me, mixed with a battered sort of hope, gave me fuel. I started simply, making lists in the cheap spiral notebook I now kept with me everywhere. I wrote down everything I knew about the fraud. Dates, names, amounts, weird conversations that hadn't made sense at the time. I even jotted random memories. Alex taking late calls at night, Sophia checking her phone too often, odd charges on our joint account. These fragments formed a map of sorts, a trail I hoped would guide me out from this pit. Doing this was painful. Every memory, each bank statement I reread, every old email I excavated, felt like cutting open the same wound again and again. But it also sharpened my resolve. With every revelation, the story of their plot became clearer. They hadn't just hoped I wouldn't notice. They counted on me trusting them implicitly, on my desire for family harmony overpowering my instinct to question what didn't add up. That stung like hell. But it was also their biggest mistake. They didn't know what I could become when backed into a corner. I started treating this as a case, my case. The law degree I'd put aside while buried under grief and exhaustion came back to life. I turned my motel room into an impromptu office, taping timelines and diagrams to the wall, filling folders with copies of every piece of paper I could salvage. Finn, now my trusty assistant, would watch as I spoke aloud, rehearsing arguments or deconstructing legal jargon until it made sense. When doubt crept in, I'd glance at him, at that unwavering faith, and keep going. Reaching out for help was one of the hardest steps. The shame of my downfall had made me reclusive, almost allergic to pity. But justice wasn't something I could accomplish alone. Swallowing what little pride I had left, I contacted an old mentor from law school, a woman named Evelyn, who'd once told me, "No one gets through the fire alone." With trembling hands, I sent her a summary of my situation, carefully sanitized at first, but raw and honest by the time I finished. To my shock, she responded immediately, "Emily, I believe you. Come see me." Evelyn helped me in more ways than I could have ever anticipated. She connected me to a small but fierce legal aid group, the kind willing to take on ugly cases the big firms wouldn't touch. We pored over evidence, filling in legal gaps I'd missed and strategizing about the best way to proceed. She reminded me that evidence was power, but only if organized and airtight. With her encouragement, we subpoenaed bank records, cross-checked property titles, and unearthed a paper trail stretching back years. Every brick of their scheme, every forged document, every suspicious transfer became another nail in the coffin of their lies. Along the way, I began documenting everything. I started a journal, recording every interaction, hostile texts from Alex, evasive phone calls from Sophia, snide comments from old friends or family who'd sided with them. These formed a record not just for my legal case, but to keep myself steady, proof that I was not imagining the betrayal, that my version of events was real and worth fighting for. The process was grueling. There were setbacks, moments when new details emerged and threatened to unravel weeks of work. Alex and Sophia hired sharp lawyers, people willing to play dirty and muddy the waters. False accusations flew my way. Rumors spread among neighbors and former friends. I had to fight the urge to scream, to crawl back into the shadows. But I reminded myself, again and again, of what was at stake. My future, my name, and all the other victims out there, past or future, who might be hurt if Alex and Sophia weren't stopped. There were nights when I broke down, tears slipping down my face as I stared at a sheaf of legal printouts I could barely afford to copy. On those nights, Finn would clamber onto the bed, his warm body anchoring me to the world. I'd whisper, "One more day, just one more piece of the puzzle." Slowly, word got around that I wasn't beaten, that I was coming back. The sting of humiliation lessened as people saw the lengths Alex and Sophia had gone to, the sheer scope of their deceit. I heard some of their friends had distanced themselves, perhaps seeing in my story a warning about who they really were. Others reached out to me in private, small, anonymous gestures, old neighbors sending notes of encouragement, a retired banker who pointed me toward a crucial discrepancy in the property transfers. These moments of solidarity were gifts I clung to through the hardest stretches. As we neared the court hearing, the sheer logistics became daunting. I spent sleepless nights assembling exhibits, color-coding timelines, and preparing for cross-examinations. Every detail mattered. Which account numbers matched to which offshore holdings, which phone numbers were linked to fake shell companies, which signatures had been forged. I was terrified, but I could feel old strengths stirring in me, a kind of righteous fury that I hadn't felt in years. Somewhere along the way, I wasn't just a victim anymore. I was a fighter, and I wanted Alex and Sophia to see that plainly the moment we met face to face. I forced myself to eat better, bundling up when the weather turned cold, taking Finn for long walks to clear my head. I started reaching out to people I'd pushed away. My mother, a couple of true friends. I let them see the blueprint of my plan, and to my relief, they stood by me, cheering me on. Community started to mean something to me again. Not just the physical streets I once walked, but a web of souls who wished me well, who wanted to see the right thing done. It was that support, more than anything, that kept me steady as the showdown approached. The morning before I was set to enter the courthouse, I stood, looking at myself in the cracked motel mirror. The woman staring back at me looked older, sharper. There were deep lines under her eyes and a set to her chin that hadn't been there before. But there was something else too, a sense of resolve. I thought of all I'd endured, the shock, the humiliation, the grind of rebuilding, the loneliness. And yet, here I was, still standing. I gathered my briefcase, checked that Finn had enough water, and stepped out into the cold air. I didn't know what the outcome would be, but I knew this. I had prepared as best I could. I was ready to face them, to lay out the evidence, to tell the story that was mine, and mine alone to tell. For the first time in ages, I didn't feel like prey. I felt like a storm gaining strength, about to break open the truth. Justice wasn't guaranteed, but it was mine to reach for, as fiercely and bravely as I could. There's something both liberating and terrifying about taking on people who once knew you best. Alex and Sophia weren't just ordinary opponents. They were part of my family, woven into every major memory, every inside joke, every sorrow and celebration. To see them across a legal battlefield was disorienting, almost surreal. In the days leading up to our confrontation, I spent hours visualizing every possibility. Would they try to manipulate me with old reassurances? Or would the masks finally drop, replaced by icy indifference or outright hostility? I was determined to be ready for anything. With Evelyn's guidance and the legal team's backup, I ran through potential arguments. We anticipated their every move, attempts to discredit me, to claim my mental health had broken under stress, to suggest that I was an unstable woman lashing out after a failed marriage and lost fortune. That narrative stung, but I resolved to face it head on. I gathered evidence of my well-being, glowing work reviews, references from families I tutored, and colleagues who knew me at my best and at my lowest. I even had Finn, more of a mascot than a material witness, but a reminder that my life was about more than the wreckage left behind. Much of the next stretch was waiting. Legal wheels turn slowly, even as your anxiety spins at blinding speed. In the lulls, I threw myself into research and writing. My journal became a chronicle, part legal notebook, part therapy, part battle cry. I wrote letters to my future self. I drafted monologues I'd never read aloud. More than once, I tore pages out and fed them to the wind when the self-doubt bled too dark. Other times, I pressed the pages flat and took a photo, wanting a record to show just how far I'd come. I started to dream about the trial, not just the courtroom, but what justice would mean for me. Even if the judge ruled in my favor, would I feel vindicated? Would the money, if I ever saw it again, help heal the hollow in my chest? The more I pondered it, the more I realized what I craved wasn't vengeance or compensation. I wanted my truth honored, recognized in public, stamped in the record, so I couldn't be gaslit or minimized or made to feel foolish for believing in goodness. I wanted the person I'd become, tempered, scarred, stronger, to stand before the world and say, this too is a kind of survival, a kind of victory. Working late at my rickety desk, I sometimes caught myself talking aloud to Finn. They took a lot, I'd murmur, but not this. I meant the fire inside me. The belief in fairness learned the hard way. Justice, I came to see, isn't automatic. It's a push uphill, a deliberate choice to stand up when it would be easier, and sometimes safer, to quit. Because for every setback, delayed documents, intimidating calls from Alex's attorney, panicky surges of imposter syndrome, I doubled down. My body felt the toll. Tension headaches, sleepless nights, a raw throat from too many whispered rehearsals. But my resolve deepened. Evelyn kept in regular contact. Her emails, a mixture of legal advice and much-needed pep talks. She reminded me that justice is often slow and messy, but that perseverance matters. The legal aid group started designating more staff to my case. A junior lawyer, harshly smart and fresh out of school, took personal interest in uncovering one of the shell companies Alex set up. Her sharp eye found inconsistencies in the signatures and timelines, a tiny crack in their fortress. We pressed on, requesting forensic audits and digging through tedious public records. With each new piece of evidence, my sense of agency returned, a reclaiming of the territory lost to grief and betrayal. Community, too, began to tentatively reach back. A neighbor who'd once averted her eyes at the grocery store dropped off a bag of groceries with a note. For you and your pup, stay strong. An older couple from my church stopped me one morning, pressing a pressed flower bookmark into my palm. You taught us something about grit, they said. I blushed, startled to realize my struggles hadn't just made me the subject of pity or gossip. They'd created a testament to the capacity for endurance in the face of cruelty. Day by day, the case became less of a burden and more of a mission. I grew impatient, a little less fearful, and a lot more focused. It wasn't just for myself anymore. Somewhere along the way, I started thinking of other women, other men, anyone who'd been left with nothing but bills and bruised pride after trusting the wrong people. The letters I drafted for court took on a different tone. Spare, direct, tough as nails. I stopped apologizing for my anger, stopped softening my words to make anyone else comfortable. Anger, channeled properly, could be clarifying. It was the strongest part of me now. The closer we got to our court date, the more the story spread. Small-town newspapers ran cautious pieces about an ongoing local legal dispute. Some people, emboldened by my fight, sent whispers of their own struggles with fraud or betrayal. Private messages, unsigned notes, late-night phone calls from blocked numbers. I kept everything, adding it to the growing stack of evidence that what was happening to me was far from rare. If nothing else, I wanted to leave a roadmap for those who'd walk this road after me. On the eve of the case, I indulged a ritual of gratitude. I walked Finn through the quiet streets, remembering early mornings in the house I'd lost, the sweet ache of old friendships, my favorite teacher's voice echoing someday. You'll rise. The world looked different now, sharper, less forgiving, yet rich, with the kind of honesty you earn only after being knocked down and clawing your way up again. That night, I slept better than I had in months, trusting that whatever happened, I'd be able to face it with my head high. The morning of the hearing arrived cold, but bright. My legal team and I gathered in a cramped anteroom at the courthouse, spreading documents across a scratched tabletop beneath the fluorescent glare. I wore my best thrifted suit, the only one that still fit after stress, and nights spent living on canned soup and hope. Evelyn squeezed my shoulder before I left to face them. Alex looked different in the harsh hallway light, gaunt and older than I remembered, a man eroded by secrecy and fear. Sophia, eyes darting, avoided my gaze. For a heartbeat, I felt the old ache, the sorrow for what might have been, for a family that could have lasted if they'd chosen loyalty over greed. But I tamped down the nostalgia. Today was not about regret, but about truth. In court, my hands shook only slightly as I sorted through the files. I recounted the story as plainly as I could. When I discovered the fraud, how I pieced it together, what it cost me in dignity, security, and belonging. I presented timelines, financial forensics, text messages, even the battered old notebook where my plan began. Evelyn pressed hard during cross-examination, exposing contradictions in Alex and Sophia's defensive narrative. Watching them squirm under the judge's scrutiny, I understood, finally and viscerally, that the truth has a weight all its own, something no amount of smooth talking or forged paperwork can overcome. Throughout it all, I focused on my breath, remembering Finn's steady heartbeat as he slept, pressed against my side during the worst of my exiles. I reminded myself that win or lose, this was the bravest thing I'd ever done. My testimony wasn't flawless. I stumbled, voice unsteady once or twice, but I didn't flinch. I looked the judge in the eye. I looked at my betrayers and saw them, really saw them, for the frightened, small people they'd become underneath layers of calculation and arrogance. The trial went longer than anyone expected. Witnesses were called, documents reviewed, tearful denials, and shaky apologies offered. There were moments of doubt, when a key piece of evidence was briefly misplaced, when Alex's lawyer tried to twist my words to suggest I'd consented to the financial arrangements, back when love made me reckless. Each time I wavered, my team pulled me back from the edge. Each time Finn's leash brushed my knee at night, I remembered who I was fighting for. When the lawyers finished, I sat through the judge's deliberations, hands clasped, breath held. The room had the airless tension of a confession booth. Evelyn whispered, "Whatever happens, you've done what most never dare." I nodded, my heart full of fear, of pride, of a strange joy in having survived the fire and brought my story to light. It would be easy to say I wanted to win for the money or the property, or even the principal, but the truth, my real truth, was that I wanted to win for the right to tell my own story, to shake loose from the shame and silence that Alex and Sophia had tried to impose on me. I wanted my name back. I wanted my sense of self restored. When the verdict came down, clear, decisive, and in my favor, it felt as though a dam had broken somewhere deep inside me. The judge's words were clinical, almost cold, as he listed the damages and the steps for restitution. But for me, each phrase was a promise fulfilled of accountability, of repair, of justice, not just as an idea, but as an action carried out in plain view. Alex and Sophia didn't look at me as the courtroom emptied. Their lawyers gathered their things quickly. I stood perfectly still, absorbing the moment, the final shattering realization that I was free from secrets and manipulation, free from the weight of being told who I was and what I deserved. Outside, Finn leaped at my side as if he sensed the change, and I crouched beside him, burying my face in his warm fur, laughing and sobbing at the same time. I had done it. We had done it. That evening, as the sun set over the courthouse, I gathered my files, shaking hands with my legal team and offering quiet thanks to Evelyn. She smiled and told me that justice isn't just for the lucky or the powerful. It's for those willing to persevere through humiliation, uncertainty, and pain. I felt the truth of her words radiate through my whole body, loosening nerves that had been clenched for years. Walking home, I thought not of vengeance or fury, but of the quiet dignity in never giving up, even when to do so would have been understandable, even forgivable. I thought of the others like me, invisible, underestimated, quietly plotting their returns. If my story could reach even one of them, could give a little courage or clarity or hope, then none of this rage or sorrow or grit would have been wasted. Finn and I paused beneath the old live oak outside my door. I knelt, tracing my palm along the bark, remembering how the world once felt cruel and endless, but how it felt tonight, full of possibility. Justice was never about going back to who I was, but about claiming who I could become, no matter who tried to bury me. With one last look at that familiar skyline, I walked inside, ready for whatever would come next. The day justice spoke. No matter how meticulously I prepared, nothing could fully ready me for the morning I walked into the courthouse, for the showdown that would decide everything. There, in the crisp autumn air, I remember standing with my hand pressed firmly on Finn's head, steadying each other. I'd pictured this day so many times on sleepless nights. The heavy doors yawning open, the click of my low heels on the tiled floor, files clutched tight to my chest. But reality felt heavier, the weight of consequence and hope thick as fog. As I moved through security and into the buzzing hallway, my stomach roiled, not with fear, but with anticipation. I had mapped out every argument, double-checked every footnote, rehearsed each line of my testimony in the mirror until my voice carried conviction, even when my heart quivered. There was a strange comfort in knowing I had done all I could, and that the outcome, whatever it might be, would finally pull me from limbo. I could feel eyes on me. Whispers floated from benches as families, attorneys, and neighbors lingered to witness the spectacle. Even after everything, part of me wanted to shrink away, to apologize for making a private shame so public. But I held my head high. This wasn't about vengeance anymore. It was about truth, about stitching together my dignity, and about warning anyone who might be walking their own road through betrayal. Finn wasn't allowed inside the courtroom, but Evelyn, my mentor, met me by the door with a squeeze of my hand and a reassuring nod. She was a force, steel-willed and warm, and her presence steadied my rattling nerves. Inside, the courtroom felt smaller than I expected, almost intimate. The judge presided from her bench, gavel resting to one side, radiating both authority and fatigue. On the opposing side were Alex and Sophia, flanked by their high-priced lawyers. I felt a pang at the sight of my old family, people I had once loved more than myself, now become strangers, eyes cold, jaws set. We opened with the usual spindle of formalities, names for the record, brief statements, reminders to swear to truthfulness. My voice shook at first, but gained strength as I launched into my account. Line by line, I detailed the unraveling. The forged signatures, the secret transfers, the way trust was weaponized against me. I saw Alex flinch once as I spoke of the night I confronted him. Sophia wouldn't meet my gaze at all. Their side tried to counter every point with lawyerly bravado, suggesting that perhaps I'd consented to the arrangements, implying my memory was faulty, my judgment broken by stress. But I didn't waver. My files were in order, the dates and details precise, a testament to the months I'd spent combing through debris for the smallest thread of exoneration. Evelyn pressed each inconsistency, forcing the admissions and half-truths into daylight, where even the most skilled attorney couldn't smudge the facts. The evidence was more than paper and words. My story was written in sleepless nights, scorched pride, bills paid with pocket change, and the echo of a life once cherished. Cross-examination hit hard. I steeled myself as Alex's lawyer tried to twist my words, bringing up moments when I'd given access, trusted too easily, relied on family. They tried to paint me as complicit in my own downfall, a woman too naive to notice the chipping away of her home. I countered with records, emails, quiet resolve. Sometimes, justice isn't about righteous fury or grand gestures. Sometimes it's just refusing to shrink when they expect you to crumble. As the proceedings wore on, moments stretched thin by legal wrangling and witness lists. I watched bank managers, friends, and even my old neighbor testify. Some reluctantly, some with surprising conviction. A few apologized to me with their eyes. A gentle recognition that the cracks in my marriage and my family's trust had been visible all along. I hoped I'd find it in myself to forgive them, eventually. During breaks, I'd find quiet corners and press my forehead to the cool glass of the hallway window. I'd breathe deeply, remembering Finn's steady presence and the promise I'd made that I wouldn't run. Not again, not when I'd come so far. Sometimes I'd catch my own reflection, tired but unbroken, and feel a flash of pride. I wasn't the same woman who had cowered at the arrival of a legal notice. This person was forged in adversity, more herself for having crawled through fire. On the second afternoon, the judge called for closing statements. Evelyn spoke first, her words even and clear. She reminded the court that betrayal by a spouse was not merely a private grief, but a calculated act worthy of the law's full attention. "My client is not here for pity," she said, voice unyielding, "but for justice and the restoration of what was stolen, her agency, her security, and her name." When my turn came, my hands shook, but my words didn't falter. I spoke of loss and hope, of the pain in imagining a future that was entirely of my own making. My past needed to be acknowledged, not as a wound, but as a reason to stand taller. Alex's attorney tried to stir sympathy, painting him and Sophia as victims of stress and confusion, rather than architects of a painful deception. But it was too late. The truth, once spoken aloud and fit together, had a momentum of its own. The judge excused us to wait for deliberations. Hours felt endless as I paced the courthouse halls, revisiting each argument, replaying each cross-examination in my mind. I called my mother, voice shaking, and she whispered that she was proud. I texted Finn's sitter for an update and got a photo in return. Him sprawled in a sunbeam, tongue lolling, as relaxed as I hoped to someday be. Eventually, we were called back in. My heart slammed against my ribs. The judge read through her findings, each sentence a measured balm on years of hurt. She listed the wrongs: fraud, breach of fiduciary duty, malicious concealment, and laid out the remedies: restitution of my property and accounts, compensation for damages, and, most important to me, a clear public record affirming the truth of my story. I did not feel triumphant so much as released. There was no standing ovation, no sweet flurry of celebration, just a deep, cold relief, as if a weight I had carried alone for too long finally slipped from my shoulders. Outside, the world looked nearly the same: cars honking, leaves blowing, strangers idling in traffic. But inside me, something subtle and essential had shifted. I shook Evelyn's hand and hugged her tightly. She told me You did this, Emily. No one can take that from you. I nodded, blinking back tears I hadn't let fall. Not for Alex, not for Sophia, not when the fight demanded all my composure. This moment was mine, and mine alone. Earned, not bestowed. On the courthouse steps, reporters clustered, hungry for a quote. I declined their microphones, choosing instead to call Finn's sitter and ask her to bring him over. When he arrived, tail wagging and eyes bright, I bent to hug him, pressing my face into his fur and breathing freely for the first time in years. For all the world's talk of justice, only I knew how dearly it cost. The self-doubt, the nights when hope felt fraudulent, the loss and solitude that made victory feel strangely bittersweet. Justice, I realized, isn't about erasing old pain or being made whole in the way you were before. It's about acknowledgement that something real was taken and that you fought and refused to accept a story written by someone else's greed. I looked at the courthouse facade, the institution, cold and stalwart, and felt at last a part of its power, not merely its prey. As Finn and I wandered away from the courthouse square, I found myself flooded with memories of the house I'd lost, the family gatherings turned sinister, the laughter that felt like a mask. Yet each painful recollection was met with a strange peace. I had not only survived, but prevailed. My world would be smaller now, more carefully chosen, each relationship examined beneath the light of hard-won discernment. I would be slower to trust, but quicker to defend myself and those I cared for. I knew now nothing about love or loyalty was sacred until it was tested and proven true. That evening, with Finn curled up beside me, I opened my battered notebook, the one that had tracked every plan, every setback, every moment of doubt. I wrote the date in block letters, underlining it twice. Then, beneath it, I wrote, "Today, justice spoke my name, not just for myself, but for the next soul hanging by a thread, waiting for someone to remind them that their story matters, even when the world seems eager to look away." In the quiet aftermath, I made a silent vow. Whatever scars I carried, they would not define me. What mattered now was what I chose to build next, with the fierce, battered hope that had brought me all this way. Blossoming from the ashes, surviving the storm, and reclaiming my sense of justice left me breathless, as if I was inhabiting a new version of myself that I'd never fully met until now. But the day justice spoke my name wasn't the end of my story. It was the fragile, sunlit morning after a hurricane. What nobody tells you about surviving devastation is that renewal isn't a single, triumphant moment. It's a series of uncertain, awkward steps. Blossoming, if it happens, is painfully slow. Blooming from ground salted with doubt, regret, and stubbornly, hope. In the first weeks after the trial, I found myself restless and oddly hollow. There were hours when the silence in my apartment pressed close, a constant reminder that I'd won, but at a great cost. My home, my marriage, and the community I thought I belonged to were changed forever. The courthouse win was public, but the business of healing was private, a lonely process made up of quiet routines and patient rebuilding. I'd wake with Finn's warm body curled by my side, the comfort of his sleepy dog grins a daily reassurance. Together, we set about reassembling a life that felt, for the first time, honest and undivided. The legal victory restored my finances in part, but money could not buy back lost time or trust. Instead, I learned to measure richness differently. My mornings were spent tending to a scrappy little garden on the balcony. Thin tomato vines, scratchy pots of mint, sunflowers striving towards the Texas sky. Each stubborn bloom felt like an act of defiance. I found pride in making things grow again, even when it was slow and messy. The act of nurturing plants mirrored the patience I needed with myself. Rebuilding relationships was another matter entirely. My mother's support had been unwavering during the worst of my ordeal, but reaching out to old friends was fraught with hesitation. Some of them had believed the rumors, or had simply drifted away in the chaos. A few quietly apologized, expressing regret for not reaching out. Others kept their distance, unable or unwilling to square the person they'd thought I was with the woman who'd fought so fiercely and publicly. In time, I let those friendships fade, with less bitterness than I expected. Survival, I realized, meant pruning as well as planting. It was okay to let go of what no longer served the person I'd become. Work became both anchor and inspiration. As my story spread, I started to receive quiet inquiries from women and a few men caught in their own webs of betrayal and injustice. I found myself the accidental mentor, sharing bits of legal strategy, emotional advice, and, most importantly, reassurance that survival was possible. I started volunteer work with legal aid groups, helping victims of fraud find their footing again. Nothing felt as healing as sitting across from someone in pain and telling them, simply and truly, I know what you're feeling, and you're not alone. Still, there were setbacks. Recovery doesn't travel in a straight line. Some nights old insecurities came roaring back, and flashbacks from the trial would play against the darkness. I'd wake, clammy, heart racing, convinced for a moment that the worst was not really over. On those days, I learned to treat myself with the gentleness I wished others had shown me. Hot showers, slow walks, scribbling poetry, letting Finn drag me to the far edges of a dew-soaked park. It wasn't weakness, I realized, to sometimes fall apart. The true mark of healing was my growing ability to pick up the pieces, on my own terms, again and again. I discovered a kind of beauty in solitude. There was more room in my world now for reflection and for curiosity. With the practical wisdom that hardship breeds, I tried new things. Online courses in negotiation and trauma recovery, baking bread from scratch, even dabbling with watercolor painting. My attempts at art were sometimes disastrous. A surreal field of purple horses, a lopsided sunset. But the point wasn't perfection. The point was that I was free to try, to learn, to err and recover, without fear of being torn down by someone else's judgment. Slowly, my sense of self bloomed in unexpected ways. I realized my worth was never truly in what I owned, the titles I bore, or the way others saw me. It rested in my resilience, the stubborn, beating heart that refused to let betrayal define the rest of my life. This knowledge crept in at odd moments, like when I caught my reflection and didn't flinch, or when I turned down an invitation that didn't feel right and made peace with my own company instead. There were moments of pure, unfiltered joy, too. A thunderstorm that rattled my window panes, but left the world washed and clean. Finn's wild chase after autumn leaves in the yard. The first paycheck signed with only my name. I hosted a painfully awkward but earnest dinner for a small circle of new friends. Women I'd met at the courthouse, neighbors who had quietly rooted for me, a teacher from my childhood who remembered my spirit. Conversation was tentative at first, but as the hours slipped by, laughter replaced caution, and we shared stories that stitched a new tapestry of belonging. I kept writing too, essays, journal entries, sometimes letters to the person I'd been at my lowest. I wrote to forgive myself for mistakes I'd made, to celebrate small victories, to map the contours of what healing really required. Some of my writing found its way into local blogs and advocacy articles, where the message was simple. You can lose everything and still come through. You can grow stronger, wiser, softer, not despite your pain, but because you faced it. As months passed and the season shifted, I realized forgiveness was the last door between me and true renewal. Not forgiveness in the sense of excusing the harm done to me. That was neither necessary nor deserved, but in releasing the hold that old anger had on my spirit. One late April morning, standing in the garden, hands dirty and sweat stinging my brow, I finally let go. The past was a country I no longer wished to govern. I wished Alex and Sophia well, not their happiness, but their growth, should they ever seek it. I hoped that the judgment against them taught something, if not to them, then to anyone watching. But I reserved my deepest compassion for myself, for the woman who had been broken, rebuilt, and had become something altogether new. A survivor who chose to thrive. When the 1-year anniversary of my court victory arrived, I marked it in simple celebration. Finn and I hiked the ridge overlooking Willow Creek at sunrise. I carried a small tin of the first rosebuds from my balcony garden. At the summit, in the amber glow of dawn, I scattered the petals into the wind. Each falling blossom was a prayer for the woman I'd been, the woman I was, and for everyone still clawing their way out of the fire. Now, when people ask me about the ordeal, I don't speak only of loss or betrayal. I speak of reclamation, of community, of the small, necessary work of loving yourself after destruction. I remind others that the day justice spoke was not the end of my transformation, but the soil from which I continued to grow. I am not defined by what happened to me, but by what I chose in its aftermath. Pain cracked open a space for new beginnings. Injustice forced me to build muscles of courage. In ways I never could have predicted, I have become more resilient, more compassionate, and more deeply alive. The woman who once whispered desperate promises to a loyal dog in a cramped motel room now laughs easily and loves fiercely, never mistaking someone else's narrative for her own.